And now with audio, I'm pretty sure. Okay, if the chat could tell me how many people you can hear, I just want to make sure this is going through because I've had just a small heart attack trying to get this organized. So, oh, thank you, Kate, for liking my bad ninja joke. I appreciate that.
And
Oh
if the real
no!
number is something greater than 2, then we have a problem.
Okay, so, keep speaking, Susan, because there's a little bit of a delay, so they'll need to hear you talking. Shy Red
Yeah, I
Fox is here, but
remember
can't
that.
stay long. Okay, good. We can hear 2 people. Yay! I'm so excited. All right.
Excellent.
Awesome. Okay, Shyred Fox, we will have a replay. In fact, this entire thing is for recording, so you will be able to
Which you're
catch the
doing,
replay.
right?
I'm sorry. Yes,
Which
yes,
you're
I'm
doing,
doing. Thank
right?
you for asking. Yes, that would be like everything about this. Yes. So okay, all right. And oh, and Deem Stretch is here. Is great. Okay, so just to tell you guys what we are doing tonight, since I have come in with I'm rolling in like the most disorganized juggernaut on a stream. Tonight, we are talking about Shinobi and Ninja in history. We are here with Susan Spann, but, oh, good, she's on my right, good.
Hello.
And Susan is the author of The Shinobi Mysteries, which look like this. It's a series of murder mysteries set in Shogunate Japan. I had so much fun. I posted about the stream coming up, and one of the first comments I got was for somebody who's like, "Oh, I love those books," and I had no idea she read them, so it was great
Awesome.
because I'm always finding more people who like them. And Susan, how many are there now? Because I was talking with somebody about the number, and I was like, 4, 5. I think there's 6. So what's the actual number?
7 in print and number 8 is in publication. So it's in the
Okay.
publication process. It should be out by the end of the year.
And we get one this summer. Is that right?
That's the one, that's number 8, which I'm hoping will be this summer. It may be,
Okay.
my publisher is running a little later than usual, but yes, that will be,
Okay.
it'll be out hopefully this year.
2020, 2021, everybody's running later than usual. That is just how it goes. Oh, you have Susan, you cannot see the chat, so I will just interpret for you. Shy Red Fox, Waves and Fangirls, I love your Hiro Hattori books. So,
Oh, thank you very
yay.
much.
Yes. So I have asked Susan here to talk about, because she does write these, she does an amazing amount of research. Susan does what I am going to call hard history, which is her historical novels are very, very accurate historical novels. I know you get the phase of the moon right, during events. Like it is very accurate. So Kate says I'm supposed to tell you that we're all squeeing. So there we go. So,
Cool.
but because I wanted Susan to come and talk to us, we see ninja or shinobi, and we'll talk about those words a little bit in media all the time. And let's get some more historical context because Susan used a sentence. Well, it's morning for you. So for you, Susan, you used it yesterday. For me, it was earlier
Yes.
today about everything is true and also not true about ninja. So I guess let's just start with Shinobi Ninja, true, not true. That's not really a starting point. That's a big lump. But whatever you would like to take with that to begin.
Well, I mean, one of the really interesting things about ninja or shinobi, and the difference in the words just briefly, is that ninja comes from the Chinese pronunciation of the characters, and shinobi is the Japanese pronunciation of those same Chinese characters, because Japanese uses Chinese characters with Japanese pronunciations. And so that's where we get the difference between ninja and shinobi. It's the exact same thing. It's just that one is the Chinese pronunciation, which was adopted more in the West, and the other is the Japanese native pronunciation, although every Japanese person here uses ninja also and knows ninja. And so you can say either one. In fact, I've had a few Japanese people not even know what shinobi was. They had to think about it for a minute and be like, oh, ninja. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, we know which word is preferable now.
Yes.
But one of the things that's really interesting is that almost everything you see in popular media, and by that I mean not historical media, right? Like the movies with the guys in the black pajamas and the masks and the whole 9 yards. All of that actually has a basis in truth, but and sometimes it's exaggerated. But the really interesting thing about real shinobi is that not only sometimes it's exaggerated, but sometimes it's actually not extensive enough. Sometimes the myth actually is paler than the truth, which is unusual and something that you don't usually find. Usually a myth is what happens when you take a reality and you blow it up, right? That's what mythology is. It's about finding a fantastical explanation for real world events. But in the case of Shinobi, there are certain cases where the real world is actually more fantastical than the myth, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and DM stretches in is in here saying, Ninja and Shinobi have always fascinated me. Looking forward to hear about the true stuff versus the Hollywood and Naruto stuff, and that is, I mean, that's the key of it right there. Is there's so much really amazing history that goes in here, but we kind of bury it under Naruto, and hey, there were aspects of Naruto that were fun, but also there's a lot more cool stuff to look at. So
Yeah.
I guess just what give us an idea of where the ninja fit historically, like what time period, what's their role here.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons that I chose to actually set my books in the middle of the 16th centuries, my books are set in like 1564 to 1560, right now, 1567, but ongoing. But that was because that time period, right before Tokugawa Ieyasu solidifies his control of Japan, is actually the height of real ninja activity. And the ninja have existed. I mean, you can argue how long they existed, because of course, when you are a group that specializes in not being publicly known, it's really hard to figure out like how long you've been around.
Right.
There are Ryu that continue to train today. Are they still actively assassins? I mean, think most of us would say no.
Not that they're going to admit to in social media.
Right?
Yeah.
What would they tell you?
Yeah.
It's like, um, but the height of real ninja activity was really basically the 14th through the 16th centuries, and mainly the 15th and 16th centuries. And at that point in time, there were two primary sets of clans. There was the Iga clan, which is the one that I know more about, but I know quite a bit about Koga as well. And then there was the Koga clan. And Iga was run by a man called Hattori Hanzo. And a lot of people have heard of Hattori Hanzo. I mean, he's a very famous figure. He was also known as Devil Hanzo. What people don't realize is that Hattori was the clan name, the surname for the clan. Hanzo is actually a title, it's not a name. Um, the person who was Hanzo would take that as his name, and so his name would be lost to history. But no one was born Hanzo. That was the title that basically meant leader of the clan. Now this was very helpful because it was used as a name, and so there's this great legend that came up around Hattori Hanzo that he was immortal, that he could turn to smoke, that he never died, that he never aged. Well, part of that is because it was four dudes, right? I mean, it's four dudes, father and son. You see him, he's always in his prime. The Hattori Hanzo, who was head of the clan in the 1560s, when Tokugawa Ieyasu was starting to make his move, was actually Hattori Hanzo II, the most famous of them, who was also known as Devil Hanzo. And there's a legend that is treated as truth, and I believe it actually is historically accurate, that when Tokugawa Ieyasu finally announced that he was going to go for the shogunate, and there was a lot going on. We could spend days talking about that history, and I
This
geek
was a
out over
pretty
that history
busy
all the time.
period. Like there was a lot going
Yeah,
on.
there was a lot going on. And there were basically three main contenders for the shogunate, and then all of a sudden Ieyasu, who was a subordinate of another shogun shogun candidate, decided, well, heck with it, I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring. And it's believed historically that he always intended to do that, and that he was just waiting for the right moment, because he was a brilliant tactician, and he realized, everyone tries to cut the head off the snake, nobody goes for the shoulder. And so he was kind of like the man behind the man until such time as he felt that he was ready to really make his move. Well, the guy he was supposed to be a retainer to didn't like that very much, as you could imagine, and had Ieyasu trapped in an inn in the mountains. And Hattori Hanzo shows up that night dressed as himself. This was one of the rare moments when Hattori Hanzo, once he became the leader, actually also went out. Showed up with a troop of dudes and a rug. And they carried the rug into the inn, because they were just workmen coming to replace a rug. And then they carried out the old rug. And Tokugawa Ieyasu was rolled up in the rug. And they just walked right past the surrounding forces and out into the woods, and Ieyasu escaped, and then was later able to double back and take take Japan. So in one sense, the Iga Ryu is responsible for the unification of Japan, if you look at it that way. So that's a really cool historical story, and one that some people know, some people don't, but it shows you that ninjas really were like pivotal at this era in Japanese history.
Yeah, because I mean the myth, the way we think of is we always think of the the ninja assassin, unless like the only that's like the primary way we view them, or we think of them. But I don't know if this is an accurate way to say it, but you could maybe almost say they were a whole nother army, but just a very subtle, because they were used for a lot more than just go kill this guy. They had a lot more role, I guess. I don't know. You say this so much better than I do. That's why you're here.
No, actually, it's true. Espionage was their primary role, right? And so they did everything that spies did. If you think of them as kind of like the James Bonds and the, I don't know how to say, like Jenny Bonds of the Middle Ages, right? Because they were first and foremost espionage agents, and so they were masters of disguise. They worked with explosives. They changed their houses. Their houses had all different kinds. They introduced all different kinds of really cool architectural details that we can talk about in their houses, trapdoors and things like that. They were assassins, but that was just sort of one of a suite of options that you had. And men and women were both trained. Men tended to be more what I would call active espionage agents, in the sense that they would go in and they would investigate. They might pose as a monk. They might pose as, there was a type of monk called komuso who walked around wearing a flute with a basket on their heads. And the reason that they did that was because the basket was supposed to prevent them from attachment to the world, because they couldn't see the world, right? So they would play their flutes and they would meditate. Well, this is a great disguise if you're a shinobi, because you walk around and it was considered really bad form, punishable to remove the dude's hat. And so some guy walks into town wearing a basket on his, I mean, you think of it as a little bit absurd, right? Some guy walks into town with a basket on his head and you're just supposed to like let him do his thing. Well, if that dude's a spy, he can wander around just pretending to be meditating under any tree and listening to everything and writing it down and spreading the word. And so that was one very effective disguise. Kunoichi, or female, which was the word for a female shinobi, would often pose as shrine maidens or wandering priestesses, of which there were many. There were Buddhist nuns who used to shave their heads and wander the countryside preaching during this time. In fact, they talked a lot about the Kumano-Kodo, which was one of the pilgrimage routes that was a Shinto pilgrimage route as opposed to Buddhist, although the Buddhists also worshipped there. And it was open to women as well as to men. And so there were Buddhist nuns and Shinto priestesses who would wander the countryside and they would pray and they would talk with people. And so for a woman actually had a lot of freedom. She could just pose as a nun and she could wander around and talk to everybody and hear about what was going on. Kunoichi were also sexual creatures. There have been women who used sex for espionage since there have been women, I guess. And so another role of the kunoichi might be to go and pose as a prostitute, or in some very rare cases, kunoichi were actually married to samurai, high-ranking samurai, and their job was to be that man's wife and to send information back to the Ryu. And unfortunately, in certain cases, those women were required to spend their lives knowing that if a certain object was sent to them as a gift, they had to kill their husband in the night.
It's a pretty hefty job description.
Yeah, indeed. Cool, but ouch.
Yeah. So I was laughing because Kate mentioned, after your carpet story, Kate mentioned in the chat, they did interior decorating as well, it seems.
And actually, they did a lot of interior decorating.
And that's, it prompted me to think of, you have a novel that has that as part of the plot, but also just, ninja posing as craftsmen, because then you can get into places, and, posing as entertainers, because if you've got, some guys meeting for high level discussions in a tea house, but one of those tea trays has ears, kind of thing. So yeah. So
exactly.
Yeah. Shy Red Fox says, "Oh, that gives me shudders." Yeah. Some of that stuff is way more fun to experience on this side of the academic table than in the historical side. Yeah.
People say to me, don't you ever wish you could go back and visit? And I'm like, really, no, actually. In addition to my real love for indoor flush toilets, I just think it's probably not as attractive as, I mean, it was dangerous work. And there were times when if they found out that you were a shinobi, they would just kill you. Like that was it. It was done because you couldn't be trusted. One of the things that Oda Nobunaga was really famous for was that he wanted to root out and destroy the ninja. Now, little known fact, he actually also worked with Koga at times. He hired them. So he was well aware of what they could do. And I think, as a historian, I think that he may have worked with Koga in part because during that time in history, again, 1560s, 1570s, if you weren't working with them, you were targeted by them. And so it was almost better to have them on your payroll, although you had to be careful because one of the things that was very true of ninjas, and it got them a lot of disparagement from the samurai at the time. A samurai fights you face to face. In fact, on the battlefield, they would usually even announce their name and their family and their clan, and they would wait for a worthy opponent to come up to fight them because you never fought somebody unless you could identify that he was samurai, that he was honorable, and then you fought each other. And that was how you resolve things. Ninja looked at that and they were like, why? Because like I can get you from behind and leave, and I live. And there's no question about this. And they were very, very, they weren't cowards by any means. They were very, very brave, but they also looked at victory as the most important thing, as opposed to looking at honor as the most important thing. And that's a very, very key distinction upon which the difference between people say to me all the time, what's the difference in samurai and ninja? And I say, well, if you take the noble blood part of it out, because samurai had to have noble blood, the difference in the philosophy, the difference in Bushido, and the difference in ninjutsu, right, is the idea that Bushido is all about the way of the warrior. It's all about honor. It's all about living and dying honorably. The way of the ninja was all about winning and living to fight another day. Mm-hmm. And so it's a really critical distinction if you look at that and you ask yourself, what was the driving force?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to interject for just a moment, since this is ultimately for an educational event. I want to stick a little bit extra in here when you brought up about the samurai announcing themselves and their family and the school that I've trained in and all of this. So you hear people all the time like, what are they doing in anime where they're shouting the names of their attacks before they're doing them and all of this ridiculous shonen tournament stuff. That's where that comes from, is that tradition of, as an honorable fighter, I will announce myself and my school, and I will tell you what technique I'm here to use and all of that, and then that leads to really, really fun culture jokes. I'm just going to do my personal little geek moment for just a second, but in the Rurouni Kenshin movie, the Tsukiyoku-hen, there's a great scene where they're trying to escape and he's just desperately running down the alley, and the guards step out and the guy announces, I am so-and-so of the, and he's just like, I don't care, and kills him and keeps going. And it's like so dramatic and so rude if you know the culture. And I giggle every time, even though it's not a scene you're supposed to giggle in, but I do. But yeah, so I just wanted to sidetrack on that a little bit, just because this is going to end up there. Great. And so sorry, let me derail everything and then try to get you back in the swing. I'm sorry. But and guys, I'm sorry too, in the chat, feel free to ask questions
Laura can convey them, and I'm happy to answer them if I
did not make that clear at the beginning.
But
yeah, I'm going to be disrupting Susan all night. Please ask more coherent questions than me just getting giddy over here. So
all good.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were about to say something. So yeah, I've got these two major clans and political alliances going on. How stable were all of these situations through this time period?
Well, I mean, in one sense, nothing in Japan was stable in 1565, but
it was a pretty exciting era, as we said. Yeah,
it was a very exciting era. In fact, as background information, we had Iga, we had Koga. Iga was basically a large clan. It was ruled by Hattori Hanzo in a sense. But then Koga was actually a confederation of clans. And so you didn't have one leader in Koga. You had a number of clans that actually had to vote. And whatever the clan decided to do was based on the vote, the majority vote of the clans. And so you had this almost republic, this almost like little ninja republic in the mountains of Koga. And they were rivals with Iga, but they weren't rivals in the sense of fighting each other. It was just that sometimes they ended up backing different horses. And so they would, engage, and you would have this sort of ninja versus ninja situation, because if ninjas were also used as bodyguards. And so if you were assigned to be a bodyguard, which is actually the case in my books, my ninja has been assigned originally as a punishment to be a bodyguard to this foreign priest. And it's not known who is paying him. Now, I, as the author, do in fact know who's paying for this, but not going to tell you. And
so rude. Have to wait for like book 27 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're the bodyguard and then another ninja, and somebody hires the other clan to come and kill the dude, that would be a problem. And you would have some ninja on ninja action, as it were, at that point in time. So, ninjas did do assassinations. That was part of, as I said, part of the available suite of activities that you can sign on for. And they ended up developing a lot of really cool toys, right? Which, we were talking about the myths. So if you're all right with it, let's launch into a few of those myths.
Let's absolutely launch into.
All right, so
this
I mentioned
we've
earlier
got a myth question in the chat, but go ahead and get started, and then I'll bring that in.
Ask the myth. No, ask the question, and because it may tie us in.
DM Stretch asks if it's true that Shinobi used to put their hands under their feet if they wanted to walk quieter, like sneaking in at night, etc., or is that just a rumor?
That is actually true, and I have seen it done at the Ninja House and Museum in Iga. There is actually a Ninja House and Museum, for people who may not know this. Iga, or Iga Ueno as it's known now, which used to be in Iga Prefecture, or Iga Province, but when they changed to prefectures, it's now part of Mie, which is south of Kyoto, and in the mountains. And if you go out there, it takes a long time because you ride this little tiny train that goes very slowly and stops at every rice field that has a platform along the way. And literally, there are platforms in a rice field, like that's the station. And you get to Iga, and they're all about their shinobi now. They love their shinobi in Iga. And so there is
which is like just hilarious, house. The idea that you've got this shadow village that nobody can know about, but now we have tourists, and it's great.
It's a major tourist attraction. Yes, yeah. Exactly. It's also the home of Matsuo Basho, by the way, the poet. He was also from Iga, which a lot of people don't realize. It kind of gets overshadowed. And so Basho's home is there.
Did he do any assassinations when he wasn't writing beautiful poetry?
I think not. Although, if you wrote bad
how
poetry,
would we know? If he was really good at it.
Right? And so that's there, and they have a ninja house. And now the ninja house that they have is a reconstruction based on plans that were real plans. And so what they've done is they've built a house that is very traditional, 16th century house, what the ninjas actually would have built. But they've rebuilt it because they wanted to incorporate more features. But they've used all the original techniques and all the original materials, and it's very cool. So you're walking down through this park in what is otherwise a relatively not modern, but 21st century looking town, and you walk up into the park, and all of a sudden, bam! Here's this structure out of the 16th century, and it's really great, and it's thatched roof, and it's the old style building. And so they've built in a lot of the trapdoors and things. And then there are guides who are trained in a lot of these techniques. And they do, in fact, show you, yes, they did walk on their hands. And it's really funny to watch them. And you go, you got to be really good at yoga to be doing this, because there's a lot of contortion involved. And not only could they walk on their hands, but they could then spring up using their hands.
I am in such bad shape now, thinking about that. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah, we've all put on the COVID-15, as it were.
Kate's in the chat saying so much field trip, and yeah, I'm right there. Let's start packing. So, and I know I've got some pictures I'm going to pull up here. But yes. I know,
and the pictures are actually from the museum that is attached to the Shinobi House, and all of the artifacts that they have in there are real, that have been donated by people who had connections to these artifacts. So they're all authentic artifacts, which is really cool.
Well, let me grab that. And then while we were talking about houses, I meant to grab one of my own photos, and then when I started panicking about the audio issues, I just forgot to get it, and I'm not going to take the time while we're live. But the Lord's house in Izuba Wakamatsu, and it's beautiful, beautiful house. And then you've got this, beautifully authentic toilet off to the side, and in the toilet, the ceiling is gone. It's just you can see all the way to the thatching and everything there, and it's specifically so nobody can hide and off you while you're doing your business. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, that's amazing that was such a concern, that you just naturally built your restrooms where nobody could kill you while you were, or at least they'd have to work harder at it. Little bit more effort.
They would. And in fact, it is known that occasionally what might have happened is you're looking up, but you're not looking in the right direction, because sometimes they hide beneath you with a spear, which is a very unpleasant way to go.
I have enough toilet trauma from researching all my Kappa stuff that I'm all set. Like I have no idea how anyone
ninja took advantage of that.
Yeah.
They took advantage of that myth, because there is in fact a myth about a demon that hides in the toilet and spears you in the rear while you're otherwise occupied.
Yes. Yeah, and I have no idea how kids in Japan in that era ever grew up to use the toilet, because you just start no, all done. So I don't know if you can see, but I've put the secret observation post photo up. If you went to okay, so DM Stretch is in the chat saying, so is that why we have a twisty toilet waste pipe these days? So the ninja can't, they have to wriggle through. That's it. Yeah.
Somebody's really traumatized. Apparently the yokai can still get through that, though, just FYI. So nobody's safe.
They're just sneaky like that.
So yes, oops, that's the wrong finger. We can go this way. So you can see right here where I'm pointing to on the picture is there's this little band of white up above. I described that badly. Let's start over. What you're looking at here is a ceiling level hiding spot. And so what would happen is that the ceiling would be lower in certain portions of the room and higher in other portions of the room, just because that's the way it was constructed in a Japanese home. And so the walkway at the side of the room had a lower ceiling, and that's what you're looking at here. You're looking at the mon, or the seal that hangs down, is actually the Hattori clan seal. And what is below that is actually the walkway at the side of the room. Above that looks like it's just part of the wall panel, like a transom that might have separated that room from the next room over, or from the ceiling. But what that really is a hollow area. And a person could lie very flat up on the top there and watch out, and they could use a blowgun, or they could throw explosives. They would not usually leap out through that narrow thing, because it's really hard to kind of come out vertically through an opening that's only about 20 centimeters high. But the shinobi would actually wiggle in there on top so that they could listen or create havoc in the room. Now, how they would get up there is actually really interesting. The room would often have a closet, which would have a sliding panel door. It would open onto a very little narrow closet that was used for storage. And there would be a shelf up near the ceiling. That shelf would look like a shelf from, you just walk up to it, it looks like just a regular shelf. But there's a little latch on top of it. And if you pull the latch, the shelf, one side of the shelf comes down, it becomes a flight of stairs that actually leads you up to a hidden panel in the ceiling. And you can get in, and then you can pull the stairs up behind you, and it becomes a perfectly normal looking wooden shelf again.
Oh, that's so cool.
So very, very cool.
Yeah.
Another thing that they would build is sometimes in stairs. And usually these devices were built into shinobi homes, but there were some samurai who hired ninjas to build some of these panels into their mansions so that the ninjas who were protecting them could use them as hiding places. One very famous one was that one of the samurai lords had a staircase that approached the second floor of his home, and his rooms were on the second floor. And the staircase looked like a perfectly normal wooden staircase, but the front panels, the risers on the stairs, were actually veneer. three of the stairs were actually veneer, and a shinobi could hide inside the stairs with a knife and stab out at the ankles of anyone who was coming up the stairs if anyone tried to come up and get the lord in the night. And the shinobi
And
would
your
just
your
hide there
feet are
at
kind of
night.
important, as if you're trying to take
Yeah,
somebody out. So that's a great way to stop it.
exactly. Well,
Yeah.
and the thing was, what you would do is the shinobi reaches out and stabs the dude, right? And yells. And then the samurai's guards, who also are obviously always on duty, show up and dispatch whoever it is that was trying to get up the stairs. So it's pretty, who of course now can't run away because his ankle's just been sliced in half by a shinobi, which, well, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay. Let's walk through some of these other pieces of equipment that we have photos of.
Absolutely.
I love these.
Mizugumo. Mizugumo. These are called Mizugumo. Mizugumo or water chutes. And so these were used. There's a myth about shinobi that they can walk on water. Well, they can't really walk on water, but this is the way that they did what was interpreted by people who saw it as walking on water, right? So it is a rule universally acknowledged that any body of water in Japan large enough will be home to both a goldfish or a koi and lotuses. It's just the way it is.
And
Lotuses
probably a
grow.
kappa, but that's another story. But yeah. Okay.
And probably, yes, indeed. Carry a cucumber. Walk softly and carry a cucumber. The So there were lots of lotus plants that would grow and lily pads that would be on top of the water. And also a lot of moats ended up being kind of brackish. I mean, they didn't, some of them, many of them didn't have good inflow. They were just filled with water. And if you, as you know, if you fill something up with water, over time it's going to get stagnant, or it's going to get muddy, or it's going to get, if you're keeping it fresh, it's going to have lotuses growing on it. In fact, if you come to Japan and you go to a lot of places where there are moats, you'll see that unless they take real care to keep them free of lotuses, there are going to be just lotuses growing everywhere. Well, you can't walk on water, if you spread the weight of your body out over a large enough surface area, you can walk on top of lily pads. And so these are shoes. The square blocks in the center would be tied to the shinobi's feet or to his or her sandals. And the wide rings around the outside, which, by the way, measure about, they're a little over 2 feet in diameter. So they're pretty big, right? And so the shinobi would carry these on his or her back and would use them to very carefully slide across the surface of the water. And they could walk on marshes, they could walk on deep mud, they could walk on, they had other snowshoes for snow, by the way, they used snowshoes for that specifically, but they could walk across a moat. And so this was the way that ninjas would breach large bodies of water that most people didn't think could be crossed, because of course, regular person can't just step on a lily pad and make it.
Right.
And there's
Yeah.
actually a smaller version of these as well that's looks kind of like a pair of, it's about the size of small swim pins, and they would just attach to the bottom of sandals, and they could be used on really thick mud. Another advantage of the smaller sized ones is that they hid footprints. They didn't look like a person's footprints.
Oh,
They
nice.
just left smears, so you could pass by and nobody would know that you'd been there. And the smaller ones are called mizukaki.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. What else have I got here in our photo collection? Oh yeah, let's do some little lock picking.
Lock picks. And so one of the really neat things about ninjas, of course, they had lots of really fun toys, and lock picks were among them. This was actually called the master key, which is kind of funny because that's actually what they called it. It's a form of lockpick for storage houses. I think these are the ones that are deliberately for storehouses, because a lot of Japanese people had storehouses, not just for grain, but also for valuables, because fire was a great big risk. And so you wanted to have your valuables actually away from your house, in a place where if your house caught fire, they would be safe. And so you'd have these storehouses where a lot of valuables were kept. Well, since valuables were there, information was also kept there. And that was really what the shinobi were after, because they largely weren't thieves. They mainly were after the information, that would also ledgers and things that might be stored there. So they had these lockpicks. There were also other types of lockpicks. In fact, shinobi were masters of the multi-function, the multi-tool. They were the early users, early adopters of the multi-tool, because they had to be really careful about how much weight they were carrying. And if they were out on an assignment that might last a long time and might involve all kinds of unknown things, you wanted to be able to do as much as you could. And so most of their tools had multi-functions. This one that you're looking at here, the one on the bottom, the small one, That's a multifunction. It works as a lockpick, it works as a storehouse pick, it works as a tool. The larger two are actually storehouse specific because there were certain types of locks that they needed to be able to get into and pick. And so those might be used if they were going on a specific assignment and they knew they were going for a storehouse and they knew which storehouse they were going for. So on a short-term assignment, whereas the bottom one would be more for long-term use. There was also a item called a gosunkugi, which was effectively a large nail, and it could be used both as a lockpick and also they could jam it into the mortar in between stones, and they could use them to climb walls. So this myth of them being able to like, oh, they can climb sheer walls. Well, no, they're using picks, man. They were using things, and they also had picks like crampons that they could attach to their sandals, so they could kick in and climb as well.
Yeah. So they were just very clever and very well equipped, which, yeah, they were going up the walls, just not by magic. So.
Exactly.
All right, this thing is like
And
the stuff of nightmares. Let's.
speaking of climbing walls, these are the hand tools that could be used for climbing, right? So these are, I'm trying to remember which ones these are because I can't read the Japanese from there. But anyway, these would be attached to the back. You can see kind of at the very back side of them, there's a little metal loop that would be tied through and around the hand and the wrist, so that these could be worn like cat's claws. Now, these are not Nicote, put a little asterisk on that. We'll talk about Nicote in a minute. These could be used, you see the man using it kind of like as a claw to fight with. You could also, the primary use for these, however, was climbing trees, climbing wooden walls. And again, it's a multifunction tool, right? It's a climbing tool first and foremost. And actually, my ninja actually uses a set of these, I think, in book 1. And they were also available for pretty much anything. You could use them anytime you needed a knife. You could hold it and use the edge of it as a blade or a stabbing tool. A tool that would maybe help you to, they also had something called a tsubogiri, which was a form of a gimlet they used to bore a hole in the wall so that they could either listen, or they could use a blowgun, or they could introduce a sleeping agent or a smoke bomb or an explosive. And this could also double for that if you needed it to. So these were really cool. Now, I mentioned they're not Nicote. There is a specific tool that was pretty much only used by women, only used by kunoichi, called Nicote, or claws of the cat, which were leather sheaths or sometimes metal sheaths that fit over the first knuckle, right? And then they would have a metal sharpened claw that came out the end. And the women would wear them. There were sets of 10, and we wore them on all of your fingers. They were usually poisoned, and they were used to get close enough to your target. They could wear the full set, or they could wear just 1 or 2, and they could get close enough to the target to scratch them and thereby poison them. But they could also be used as full fist, full hand fighting weapons. And so that was specifically a female weapon. It was one of the few weapons, actually, that was more used only by women. Women also used the full range of devices that the dudes used. So we just had more tools at our disposal.
All right. And, oh, yes, let's talk about this.
Yes, let's talk about things that go boom. I love
Yeah.
this. So this is actually a cannon. And as you can see, it's made of wood. It's not made of steel. And Shinobi would make cannon they learned how to make cannons out of trees and out of logs. And they were single-use cannons. They did work. Obviously, they did not have the same firepower that an iron cannon would have, right? Or any kind of metal cannon.
But it's a lot more portable.
The advantage to them was, yes, and it could be made on site. And in fact, that was the whole point of these. This would have been made on site for single use. So if you needed to get through a wall and you didn't really care about stealth, and sometimes stealth is not the point, you would just make a cannon right there on the spot. Just take your little ties with you and heck, make a cannon. Why not? In addition to cannons, Shinobi also used a variety of other explosives. They used something they called rockets. The Japanese literally translates to rocket. it is an arrow with an explosive canister attached to it that would be fired into a building in order to set off an explosion. And sometimes that was designed, those were rarely used to kill. Those were mostly used either as a diversion or to get everybody's attention or to frighten a group of people, which would probably be pretty effective. I mean, if you
Pretty
think about
effective at all three, I'm thinking. Yeah. So
yeah, you're sitting around in the middle of the night, you're just kind of like asleep, and all of a sudden here comes a boom. Okay, which again was part of the myth of shinobi being sorcerers, because if you paint your arrow black and you attach an explosive to it and you send it in the middle of the night, all somebody sees is you standing 30, 50 yards off, and then the next thing you know, the building explodes. And that's I mean, that looks like sorcery if you don't know what's going on behind it. There were also other types of explosives that they would use. There were chain explosives, and a lot of the explosives were packed gunpowder into bamboo tubes. Okay, so you had a variety of sizes because bamboo comes in a variety of sizes. There were also chains where they would take bamboo tubes filled with explosive and they would tie them together with a form of rope that served as a fuse. And so what would happen is they could set the length of the rope and the explosions would go off in sequence. So they basically timed.
Yeah, you could time that really, really well. Yeah.
Yes. And they were obviously the single portable bamboo stalks that could be lit and thrown. One advantage to bamboo is it itself is a timer, because if you pack the bamboo stalk with gunpowder, you can set the bamboo stalk on fire, or you can set a fuse outside of it that goes into the bamboo tube. You set the fuse on fire, you leave the tube, you've got a time delayed explosive. So that was something else the shinobi used. And then they used smoke bombs. Smoke bombs were very effective. It was part of the reason that the myth grew up that shinobi can turn to smoke, which was that they could set a smoke bomb, they could throw it down, it would go poof, and then by the time the smoke cleared, they were gone. That was mainly because they knew when the bomb was going to go off, they knew to close their eyes and how to get out. Like they already had their escape route planned. Yeah. And in their houses, they actually had rotating wall panels. Like you see in Scooby-Doo where like the panel rotates in the wall. Those are real, and shinobi used them, and they were very smooth operating. So a shinobi could throw down a smoke bomb if he's in his or her own house, and you come in and you breach the house, throw down a smoke bomb. They're through the panel before the smoke has cleared, and the panel looks identical on the other side. So you don't even know that the wall has moved, and the shinobi is gone. And that panel leads to a hidden pocket in the wall that then leads not only to the next room, it leads actually down under the house and out. So they're in the woods 100 meters out before the smoke's even cleared.
Long gone. Yeah. Long gone. So Kate's in the chat saying, who do I hire to build me a shinobi house?
So, it would be cool. It's very cool.
I have a hidden passage in my house with a bookcase that moves. So that's my pride and joy right there. Okay.
Oh, that's so cool.
We got a few things going on in the chat. So DM Stretch asks if it's a ninja flashbang. Yeah, basically. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep. How do you spell the poisoned claws used by the women? I think so. That's a Nicote.
Nicote. So it's Neko-te. Nicote.
And Kate's describing the house as an introvert's dream. So there we go.
Yes, so. Indeed.
Awesome.
Where do I get me one of those?
All right. Thanks, guys. And commentary is always welcome. Please ask questions as you have them. Jump in. So, I remember being really surprised when the first time I learned about ninja using, gunpowder historically. And they're like, well, okay, logically this makes sense. Why wouldn't they? But also that's just not the mental image we have of, the taijutsu and all the cool tools, and gunpowder is a perfectly reasonable tool. It's just not the mythos. So,
in fact, there's actually one other cool thing that I'll mention about the gunpowder is that shinobi were the ones who made it. It came to Japan from China and from the West, but the shinobi really specialized in it and they had a variety of different recipes, some of which were much more violent than others. And some of them were designed to produce more smoke, some of which were designed to produce sparks, some of which were designed to produce big bangs or small bangs. They really tailored it to their needs, but the recipes were kept highly secret. And so that is actually the reason why most shinobi houses actually had 3 levels, 3 floors. They had an upper floor, they had the regular floor, and then they usually had a subterranean floor or a hidden room in the if it was in the house, it was a hidden room that was sort of in between the floors, which is where the gunpowder was made. And it was always made in a secret room because other shinobi and everybody else really wanted to know how this was done. They really wanted to know what was mixed. They really wanted to know, how to make it. And so it was a very, very secret process. It was usually handed down from father to son within the within the clans how to make it. And
Cool.
at the Ika Ninja Museum, they actually have an original mortar that shows how they grind
Wow.
the components.
Cool. Okay, let's see what else we have in the photo collection here. Oh yeah, these.
Caltrops. So these are really devious. These are kind of fun. Ninjas used caltrops, which caltrops, I'm assuming that people who are our people probably kind of have an idea what this is already, but I'll tell you because not everybody knows.
They exist in
Caltrops
Western history as
are,
well, but spatulars. Yeah, go ahead.
they do. They are something, they're an object that is scattered either usually behind you to stop pursuers from chasing you. Right? Occasionally, the police now will use them in modern chases. They'll get in front of whoever they're trying to chase, and they'll drop them so that the car that is they're trying to stop will go over them and blow out the tires. But caltrops are usually sharp. They're designed to stop people or horses or whatever is chasing you because they injure it. Ninjas used three different kinds of caltrops. They used steel, which were shaped like spikes. They used wood, which was carved into sharp ones. And then they used these are entirely natural. These are seed pods from a tree that grows in Iga Prefecture. And as you can see, those are pretty wicked. They're actually pyramidal in shape. And so what you can't see very well in the picture, but there's also a thorn poking straight up. So no matter what way these land, they're like demon Legos of the worst possible sort. They are, I had a sweet gum tree in my yard growing up, and that thing dropped little thorny balls. And believe me, they will stop you if you're going across the lawn barefoot in high speed and hit one of those things. It will stop you on a dime. And these are even worse. So this is one of the many tricks in the Shinobi bag. And they used to, what they would do, when they'd sneak upstairs to, especially for assassinations, they'd sneak upstairs, they'd have these ready, they'd kill their target, and then they'd run. And as they're running down the hall, they'd be throwing these caltrops out after them. So that, because bear in mind, in a Japanese house, nobody's wearing shoes.
Right.
You're wearing tabi at best. And so you're coming down the hall in your socks, your thin socks, and the hall is highly polished. You hit one of these, that chase is over.
Yeah. You keep a lot of nerves and important bits in your feet. So DM Stretch is mentioning, yeah, these are the Ninja D4s. Yes, in modern times, Ninja used Legos. Yes. That is the modern equivalent to make this happen. Yeah. Okay, and then this is cool. Yeah.
So I mentioned that ninjas were espionage agents. So ninjas had something, and a lot of people have never even heard of this before. This is goshikimai, or 5-colored rice. Ninjas would carry tubes, little bamboo tubes that were filled with colored rice, and the rice was in 5 different colors. And the reason that it was 5 different colors is that you can create a cipher for the Japanese language using 5 colors. And as you can see reproduced on the chart below, up either 2 or 3 grains of colored rice in certain colors put together were used to represent different phonetic syllables within the Japanese syllabary. And so you could leave these grains of rice around, and you could leave messages for other shinobi who might come along and find them. And the really interesting thing about this, of course, is that it's the perfect cipher because it will naturally, first of all, if you're caught with it, it means nothing. You're carrying 5 tubes of colored rice. I mean, that's a little hanky. I mean, like if you're walking through a town and they search you and they find these tubes of colored rice, they could be like, why? But it's easy enough to come up with an explanation for that. Now, even if they don't buy it and they think you're a shinobi, it's really hard to execute somebody for rice. And there's no way for them to figure out what it's used for. There's no way for you, like you can't break the code because the code was only kept here. It was memorized. So there's no way for them to break the code. There's no way for them to learn. They can capture the rice all they like. Only if somebody talks could they learn the cipher, and a shinobi will never talk. They'll die first. The second thing about this that's really ingenious is that your message won't last too long because there are a lot of birds in Japan. There are a lot of animals, and they'll eat this rice. So once the message has been received, whoever receives it can literally just kind of do this and scatter the rice around, and it's just a little bit of rice on the ground, and the birds will eat it immediately, which also is, by the way, it's negative, because if you leave someone a message and it takes them too long to come and get it, the birds will get it first.
Right.
And so people often ask, like, well, what use is it at all? I mean, won't the birds come the next morning? And the answer actually lies in another unique facet of Japan, which is if you go in the countryside here, you will find that periodically there are small shrines by the roadside, and they have Buddhas in them, and they have a roof, and they're like a little building that's usually maybe a couple feet tall by a couple feet high, sometimes larger. But there's a space. The Buddha sits in the middle of this wooden box with a roof on it, and there's a space behind the Buddha. And so you can actually leave a message in a totally protected from the elements place. And most people are not going to go snooping behind the Buddha because that's a little bit sacrilegious. So there were all kinds of places in Japan that you could leave a message for someone that it wouldn't be seen, and it would be protected long enough for your recipient to get it. And then all they have to do is sweep it into their hand, throw it on the ground, and the message is completely gone.
Yeah. And even if somebody did find it, like, okay, it's colored rice. What do you even do with that? Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't look like a message because they didn't arrange it to look like Japanese characters or to look like kana. Right. It was simply pieces of rice laid out in a row.
Right. Yeah, I just thought that was pretty awesome. That was very cool. So, okay.
One of the things that most people don't know about. So
no, cool. And it's definitely one of those things where the truth is cooler than the fiction. Like turning to smoke is cool and all, but like this is sneaky. Okay, so yeah. DM Stretch is saying this would be harder to crack than the Enigma code. Yeah, because the Enigma code, like, you actually have the message to look at while you're working at, and this is so temporary, so quick to go. So, yeah. Bring us back here. So I think just the concept of there was so much ingenuity that went into, developing this, this ninjutsu. It's just really good science and really good imagination, and they were great magicians, and all of these things. So you've got these clans. So is everyone in the clan being raised as a ninja? How does this work?
Yes, basically everybody in the clan is raised as a ninja, and they're also farmers. So the ninja village would look just like a regular little farming village. If you walked into it, it looked just like a farming village. It's just that they would spend a lot of their time doing other things. Now, some of them did specialize more as farmers. I mean, a lot of the skills were passed from, as I said, from father to son or from mother to daughter. There was some training of other people within the clan, but it was largely a family, handed down sets of skills. People would specialize in different things. Not everybody is good at everything. Some people are better at thrown weapons. Some people are better at hand-to-hand combat. And one of the things that the ninja were really good at was teaching people to their strengths. But some of the things that every ninja would be good at, right? Disguise. They were all masters of disguise. That was one of the easiest things, to do in terms of acquiring a skill. And, you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, at how easy it is to get information if people think you're something other than you are, right? If they think you're a holy person, then they think you don't have any interest in the world, especially
if you're a total nobody peasant. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. In fact, there's a reason that the famous ninja outfit, the black pajamas, right, with the mask and everything else, those the sort of what people call the black pajamas are actually a near perfect replica of what Japanese farmers used to wear. Those are farmers' clothes. And the majority of the population was farmers, just dirt farmers. And they would come and go from villages, and farmers would come and go from the villages all the time, bringing food and bringing rice and bringing other things. In fact, they had to, because rice was the primary unit of currency. And so the farmers who harvested the rice would have to bring it to the samurai lord in the town. And so there were reasons for random
That's how you
farmers
paid your
to show
taxes.
up
I'm
in
just
town.
here to deliver the taxes. Also to kill you, but just to deliver the taxes, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you'd wander in, and peasants were largely invisible. They always have been at all times and places. You know, a peasant. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. I've got a cat in here trying to make her presence known at this point. Peasants have always been invisible to the upper classes, and so serving as trying to mimic a peasant is a really great way to become invisible in and of itself. And that's also, again, I think part of what leads to the idea that ninjas could become invisible. Because if you are disguising yourself as someone that most people don't even look at or see or pay attention to, right? It would be akin to, in some of the cities in the US today, disguising yourself as a homeless person. People don't see them. And if you don't see them, they don't exist. So therefore, they're invisible.
Yeah. We do have someone in the chat saying "Ubi Ubi," so I don't know if she would like to make an appearance or not.
All right, let me see if she will. Hey, sweetie, you want to say hi? Come here, baby. Ubi Ubi, here she is. This is my ninja cat.
She's like, I didn't sign up for this. What are we doing? Okay, hi. Hello, Ubi.
Can you say hi? Say hello.
She's got her own international fan club.
She does. She's my good girl. She also serves as the model for the cat in my books. She was actually just had decided to settle in her bed when one of her many beds. She's going to settle again. Good. We're not going to have shenanigans. Now, Laura, you actually asked about the clothes earlier. Do we want to chat for a minute about the ninja
Yes.
duds?
Yes.
Okay, so there's this myth that the ninjas wear black clothes that look like pajamas. The reality is, as I said, it mimics the farmer's clothes. They were sometimes black. More often, they were midnight blue, almost like an indigo, because indigo dye was more, more available. And also, it was just sort of the color that they wore gray, they wore black, they wore brown. They wore basically any color that would disappear in the nighttime.
Blend.
And they did in fact wear a mask, although it wasn't a mask the way you often see, like the actual like mask with the eye holes. More often it was a very long, narrow strip of cloth that was actually wound around the head multiple times, sort of mummy style, and it would leave the eyes exposed, which is why you see it really wasn't a hood with a mask. It was very often just a long piece of cloth. And the reason for that was that long strip of cloth could also be used. You could tie it to your grappling hook, and you could use it as a rope. You could use it to tie someone up. You could use it to tie around a burden and lower that burden down a wall before you got down, and then use it.
It's another multi-purpose tool.
Rappel down the wall. It's another multi-purpose tool, and the easiest way to carry it is just wrapped around your head.
Yeah. So DM Stretch is pointing out in the chat, black shows up more at night. It's darker than the surroundings. Yeah, and I heard previously that, gray was a much more logical color because that actually blends into so many more things. Your point about indigo dye being readily available is great because you're not going to be inconspicuous if you're dropping big bucks on your clothing, right? Like that's not the way to be inconspicuous.
Exactly. Well, a lot of it was homespun. And curiously, the other thing that you will find at the Ninja Museum that most people don't expect is chainmail, which chainmail was rare in Japan. It was very expensive, and lacquered bamboo armor was far more common. The chainmail actually was not used for fighting. It was used for training, mostly for ninjas. There are incidents of them having used it, but far more often it was used for training, because if you could run and fight wearing chainmail, then you'd be much faster, much stronger when you weren't wearing. And so that was actually where
So
they used
to quick borrow this for the Anime Con translation, it's taking the weights off. Yeah, and
yeah, exactly.
Oh, the two mics are imbalanced. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on with the audio. We had all kinds of trouble getting started, but I will just sit further back. How's that? And not get as excited about things. So hopefully you'll be able to hear Susan better. Let me just take my own gain down just a little bit. All right. With that, you guys.
I'm sorry about my lighting, by the way. My lighting is very strange today because there's a lot of glare.
Your lighting is better than my sound, so we're fine. So okay.
It's the time of year. We've got I've got a window to one side, and the sun is going. It's a southern exposure, so the sun is like changing as we're talking. I'm trying to adjust with all the lights I have, but
So
my usual room that
you're being
I
told the lighting is fine.
transmit
So
from. Okay, thank you. My usual room
yeah,
that I transmit from has a window behind me, and it's usually really great lighting. And today, because of the time of year, the
it's
glare
on
was
fire.
insane, and oh, it was totally on fire. Yeah.
So, um, but yeah, and tell me if this is true because we hear things about that black iteration of that outfit being more tied to theater later. Is that true or?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was definitely used that way. The other thing about that outfit that's really notable, and there is one again, there's one at the museum, but my photos of it are terrible because, as I said, when I sent my photos to you, it was 2 cameras ago, and I was not the photographer then that I am now. So unfortunately, when you're trying to deal with glass and glare and all the kinds of things, and not a great camera at the time, oh well. But those there's a myth about the shinobi having all these pockets, and that is true. The inside, it was on the outside, it looked just like a normal farmer's coat, but on the inside there were usually about 9 or 10 pockets all around, and then the different tools would go in different pockets where they could be hidden and not seen when the coat was wrapped over and closed. So pockets in the clothing, very, very ninja real.
Very cool. Awesome. All right. Um, yeah, and again, guys, if you got questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep bothering Susan. She might be grateful to have somebody else ask if a minute. so, um, so when you there's like as you say the origins, when they exactly started, a little bit misty just because the nature of the beast. Oh, we hear that you keep answering the questions before they get typed, so good job. So then we've got during this Tokugawa period where they're actually quite influential and very important. When does that start to change and we see the diminishing of the importance of the ninja?
I think really actually during the Edo period, during the start of the Edo period, so the 17th century and onward, they really diminish and they sort of fade into the background. There was another Hanzo after Hattori Hanzo II, Hattori Hanzo III, who was influential. And then after that, it just sort of fades away. And part of that is because Tokugawa Ieyasu, having seized power, was not hostile to the clans, but was not they weren't really needed. And he didn't want espionage. So he really clamped down on the clans once he was in power because he knew how useful they were to him, and he didn't want them being useful to anyone else. Because once you seize power, the negative is that
It should
once you
stay
use all these
seized.
methods.
Like I worked for this. Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. You want a dynasty, and so Ieyasu really put in a lot of rules, implemented a lot of programs that made it much harder for them to function. The institution of the barrier system, that the 5 main travel roads, the Tokaido and the Nakasendo and the others, with barrier stations across them, and that really checked everyone, and everyone had to be searched. And it was no longer the case that a monk could just wander through the barrier station, wander through the road. You had to go through the barrier station. You would be searched. Your paperwork would be checked. You weren't getting into Edo unless you went through the barrier. There were several barriers along the way. So he was really controlling the way people were moving in a very different way, which created problems because if you're a ninja, yes, you can deal in espionage, but now you've got to be legitimate, right? Now you've got to have travel papers. Now you can't be hiding things in the pockets of your clothing because your clothing's going to be searched. Women who went through the barrier station, even their hair was searched. They hired an older woman who lived at the Hakone barrier, and her job was to search the hair of the women who went through. So she would take a comb and literally comb through their hair to make sure that they didn't have plans or maps or weapons or anything. And then, of course, they also checked to make sure that the women were, in fact, women, because one of the easiest ways to try and smuggle a young warrior out of the city was to dress him as a woman. And
Right.
so once Ieyasu put in all of these implemented all of these restrictions, it became a lot harder for espionage to go on. Not impossible, and the clans still continued to exist, but they did sort of fade out as Japan entered the modern era.
Okay. All right. Well, I am. I'm just. I'm just happy to nerd all night. Like this is great. This is, as we've mentioned, it's such a. I don't know. Is turbulent the right? Is that an overused word? I don't know. It's a very dramatic
No,
period.
I think it's correct.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So Kate's asking if they would forge travel papers. How feasible was that?
Oh, absolutely. They were master forgers. Some of them, in fact, some of them did that. One of the interesting things about Japanese calligraphy that's really sort of unique and strange is that when you study traditional Japanese calligraphy, what you quickly realize is that you're learning to become a forger of ancient documents, because the whole point is to copy the writing precisely. And so when I study Shodo, I work from a model which is actually a book of 14th century poetry. And so my goal as a calligrapher is to reproduce exactly the writing as it was written. And so when you have a cultural element that's so strong of this idea that precise copies of ancient texts are a good thing, it's a very easy thing for a shinobi to then take that to the next step, which is, okay, well, let's copy something that's maybe not quite so ancient. And all the training is there, right? It's the same training.
Right.
And so yes, they would definitely forge travel papers. It was done all the time. The issue was mainly that you needed to make sure that you forged them in a way that didn't get back to whoever you forged it. You know, it would be better to forge the signature of a distant daimyo than the local one, maybe.
Right. Right. And you know, seals, like the whole idea of a seal is to endorse, but also, you know, you're doing it in a mass form, right? So you can replicate that. And yeah,
Seals were
so
harder, by the way. Seals are much harder to reproduce. Seals today, to this day, actually, the hanko is still used in Japan as a formal signature. I have
right.
3, and one of them is registered. And it's very, very difficult to reproduce those. But yeah, ninja would, and of course, it would have been easier hundreds of years ago when the ability to compare things was maybe not quite as good as it is today.
The 30 times magnification was not as readily available. So yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the barriers. I was actually going to ask you to speak about that, but you got that to me. So so great. That was so just nerding for a minute. Susan actually took me to one of the reconstructions of a barrier station. It was fascinating. Just yeah, this I don't know. It's so much fun. I'm a nerd. What do you want?
That was
History.
the Hakone barrier, and that was
Yes,
basically oh my goodness, it was like 2 years ago this
I
week.
know. 2 years ago next month. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Oh, it's been, hopefully you'll be back here sooner rather than later.
I've got all my digits crossed for late 2021. We'll see. Okay, so DM Stretch is wondering, for purely recreational purposes, I'm sure, how a seal might be forged. So, purely for game and reenactment purposes, definitely not going to empty your bank account, Susan. So,
Well, the way you would have to forge it the best way using 16th century techniques, right? 16th century techniques, the best way to do it was you would get an example of the real seal, the actual seal itself, preferably 2. And then you would carve using a blank, which seals are carved from blanks. A hanko is a small object made of either stone or wood. Usually it's made from stone because wood is really easy to duplicate, or ivory. And you would carve in relief on the bottom so that when it's stamped into vermilion ink and stamped on paper or wood or whatever you're stamping it on, you leave an impression, right, of the person's name, which served as their signature. So you get an example of the original, the real one, and then you would carve one that you thought was close. You know, you'd take a measurement from the impression, from the seal that you're looking at on a piece of paper. You would carve it, and then it would just be a matter of trial and error. You would carve what you thought was good enough. Pardon me. You would stamp it in ink, you would stamp it on a different piece of paper and you would compare them. And you'd say, okay, this one has a small, I need to add a little line here. I need to cut away a little bit there. And then you would just practice it until you got to the point where what you stamped on the paper looked identical to what was there. So it would be a
Yeah.
matter of being able to look at an image that had been stamped and knowing how to carve a seal to produce that same image, and then comparing what you've done to the original until you had it right.
Yeah, and if it's not right, you get to start over. There's not a lot of adjustment that you can do
Yeah,
on the
that's
fly.
that's the worst part. Yeah, you would, and probably what you would do is you would probably start with what you knew was too, if it has lines, you'd start with lines that you knew were too wide so that you could then take a little bit away, because obviously you can't add material back, but you can continue to take away things like that.
Yeah. And so let's do just a little bit more myth busting since we're on that. I've definitely read books or games or movies or whatever. So we're going to move now to Imperial Seals, not just the more everyday ones like you're talking about that are stone or ivory or something. But if we're engineering a political takeover, and so we're going to steal the Imperial Seal. And the characters
Good
will
luck
run
with
in
that.
and grab that and stick it in their pocket and keep going, whatever. And guys, like, I got to see one from China at a fantastic museum exhibit. It's 45 pounds of gold. Like, you are not going to throw it in a sleeve or a pocket and run on. Like, it's 45 pounds of gold. It's fine. But yeah, that was one that
Moreover, it was never kept. It wasn't in the bedside table. Like
oh,
the
no.
imperial regalia in Japan, the imperial regalia is actually not even kept. Like, it's kept near the emperor, but he can't just like lay hands on it anytime he wants to. It's actually like kept under lock and key and guard, and because it's ravens leaving the Tower of London level problem
Right.
if you lose the imperial regalia. So in
Right.
fact, there was an emperor, one of the emperors who actually is connected with the Kumano-Koto pilgrimage, who he didn't actually create it, although there's a myth that he did. He was a very early traveler on it, though, who was a young emperor. He was very young when he was appointed, and he only ruled for a very few years, like 5 years, I think, because after that, his family actually arranged for the theft of the imperial regalia and gave it to I think it was his cousin, either his brother or his cousin, and went to him when he was on the throne and was like, yeah, we have the seal, so you're not the emperor anymore, so you might as well abdicate.
Okay, so I've talked about. I've actually got a separate talk about the sword, the mirror, the tama, all of this, and I've never heard of. We're just going to ship the seal off to somebody else. So long, too bad, guys. And so I'm going to have to look that up because that's amazing and horrible and awesome all at the same time.
If you get here at the end of 2021, it's on the Kumano-Koto. There's a monument, and the history
Okay.
is all talked about there on the
All right.
Kumano-Koto.
That's what
But
I'll be
yeah,
doing when
and
we're
he
done
did.
here.
But by the way, he did. He was like, well, I guess I don't have the regalia anymore, so I'm not emperor anymore. So he abdicated and left and became a
Right.
monk.
Like, so that's so polite and orderly. Like, yeah, okay. I'm just got to interrupt. Like, the chat's going on because my great creative people hanging out in the chat are realizing that this is a heist movie waiting to happen. 45 pounds of gold that can knock somebody out. Like, they're planning this right now. So we'll wait and see what we have next week. Create in, I think next week is if I remember correctly. So there we go. I want to see some of this in the chat next week. So there we go. Yeah. So. So can we? I don't know. It's not really on topic. I don't know. Sorry. Let me get back. Ninja, we're back. We're here for Shinobi.
Off topic's good.
Yeah, good. So, sorry, I got totally distracted by the heist movie going on. Like, no resentment, no regrets. It was a great way to get distracted, but now I've kind of lost where I was taking the rest of this. Yeah. So, you've got. We were in the middle of forging things. That's what we were doing. So we're forging papers. Could you? Obviously, this is not just for travel. Like, once you start forging stuff, there's a lot of things that can be forged. Are there any great forging examples that we should know about historically?
I mean, I think the best ones we probably would never know, right?
Good point. Excellent point. Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing comes to mind except that I do know that it was a very high level art. I know that the people who were good at it were very, very good and were employed by their ryu or their clans for purposes of forging. That was, if that was your skill, that was definitely what you'd be employed doing, and they definitely did do it. Travel papers were probably the largest single item that was forged, but I mean, I'm sure there were all different kinds of things as well.
So I know that you are a more advanced practitioner of shodo and displaying and such, displaying your work and such. And what keeps you, aside from ethics, but what if you presented a poem that you have copied very, very well? What is in the modern community to, I mean, some because of the paper that's being used, those are really well preserved pieces. So what can you, when someone is trying to sell me a 14th century poem, what can I look for?
There are experts here who can authenticate. They can authenticate and date the inks, which is the biggest, part of it. I would say if someone's trying to sell you a 14th century poem today, your best bet is to go Indiana Jones on them and say it belongs in a museum. Recently, actually, there was a discovery of a very ancient manuscript, part of the Tale of Genji, an original of the Tale of Genji that was discovered in someone's attic here in Japan. That apparently
That's a
was
heck of
one
an
of the
attic.
originals. Yeah,
My
it
attic
was
is
one of
not
the
that
lost
cool.
chapters. It was one of the lost chapters. And well, there are still some buildings here. The building next door to me actually is an Edo period workshop that's still in use. And so you do still have buildings here that are very old. And when people die, things get cleaned out and they go, wow, that looks really old. We should probably take a look at it. And fortunately, instead of trying to sell it to a private collector, they turned it over to the museum, and it's being studied now. But it was in fact a lost chapter of the Tale of Genji, an original lost chapter from the Tale of Genji.
Like that is the stuff of movie plots right there. Is we found missing chapters from the Tale of Genji, which for those of you who are not quite as nerdy, often considered first novel, definitely first novel of Japan, Murasaki's story of a guy who got around a lot is probably the least respectful but most accurate summary of the Tale of Genji.
Ghosts,
So yeah,
sex, and violence. It's absolutely the first novel.
Yes, Kate's saying "wow" in the chat. Yeah, you just blew my mind with, when we find stuff over here, and there was a pretty cool discovery a few years ago. It was an original memoir from the sinking of the Essex, and but that's not quite going back as far as the Tale of Genji. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing living here in Japan and even traveling in Japan, because for example, there's a place called there's a open air folk house village, Nihon Minka-en, down south of Tokyo. And I was down there at one point looking, and you can walk into these houses that have been moved from all over Japan. I think you did go there when you were here
It was
visiting.
amazing. One of my favorite visits. Yeah.
I still have my little folded grasshopper, by the way, that was made from a blade of grass. But
one of the men there taught me. It's been 2 years. I definitely can't replicate it. But to take the long grass stems and fold them into insects and the most adorable grasshoppers. So yeah, okay.
So I still have mine up in my room. But as you're walking through this place, there are items that are labeled. And one of the things that really struck me was that there is a miso barrel used for fermenting miso paste in one of these houses. And it was an original miso barrel. It was original to the house. And the date on it is like 1660 something, 1662, 1663. And as I was walking past, I looked back, and it's not in a glass case. It's not behind a barrier. It's sitting in the corner of a house that anyone can walk in. Like you could get into it if you, I mean, they'd ask you not to, but being Japan, they'd probably just say, we'd really appreciate if you wouldn't do that. But it's just sitting there. You can walk up and touch it. Again, there's a sign that says, please do not touch. But I mean, there's nothing stopping you. There's no guard there. There's no, and it's older than the United States.
Yeah.
And you look at it and you think to yourself, this is so old. This is so important. This is such history, so big. And yet it's just sitting there. The air,
Yeah.
open to the air.
It's
doing its
usually
thing.
stated about the US versus the UK, but it applies to a lot of countries, is that in the UK thinks 100 miles is far, and the US thinks 100 miles, 100 years is old. But that's exactly the case here. That they're like, oh yeah. I remember when I was in, I studied in Spain, and I looked over, as we were traveling, and there's windmills like Don Quixote tilted at these windmills, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what and they're like, oh, that's not old, that's like 1400s, they're not old. And I'm like my American brain is exploding, it's 1300s, it's not old, it's no big deal. And TM's
Totally.
Pointing out, meanwhile in the UK that's regarded as recent history. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about perspective.
It absolutely is. And the thing is, you've got, my son is fond of saying you can't throw a rock in Kyoto without hitting something that's, from the 13th century. And I said, well, then we better not throw rocks. But the other thing that's really interesting about Japan is you have these very, very old items side by side with very, very new items. And you also have a unique concept of time and originality. And what I mean by that is Shinto shrines, Shinto being the indigenous religion of Japan, is very animistic. Shinto shrines traditionally would be rebuilt every 20 years. And the reason for that, they would use the same plans, they'd use the same materials, they'd use the same methods. They would rebuild the whole thing. And sometimes for the larger shrines, they would rebuild part of it. So it was kind of on a rotating cycle, so that every few years you'd rebuild something else, but none of them were more than 20 years old. And yet, if you ask someone how old a shrine is, they will tell you, it's 1,300 years old. The building itself might only be 18. And you would say to them, well, but this building, how old is this building? And they'd say it's 1,300 years old. Because the idea is that it is exactly the same building. It is the same building. It's just that, the materials have been replaced, but it's exactly the same building. And it's funny because in the United States, we talk a lot about like something being original. It's valuable if it's the original. And I have a lot of people who come to visit me here who say, well, I want to go see the original buildings. I don't want to see the rebuilt buildings. And my response to that is, well, if a building has been consistently rebuilt using the same methods, the same materials, the same plans, and by the same materials, I mean, they're literally still growing the trees on the same forest where they've been growing them for 1,300 years to rebuild with these sacred cedars. It is the same building.
Yeah, you're seeing the same building just without the wear and tear. Yeah.
Exactly. And the idea behind it in Shinto, by the way, is if we're giving this to the gods, why would we want to let the gods have old, busted, broken down buildings? Gods should have new, pretty buildings.
Yeah.
They're not wrong.
Yeah.
They're not wrong in the sense that an offering should be the best you can give.
Right. And you're, as far as I went to see, the authentic building, the original building, like that is what it, and when in the U.S. when we renovate something, we take this old building and then we're like, oh, let's give it the brand new shag carpet and wood paneling. Okay. Like that's how we renovate, and it doesn't always preserve the character. But that, as you say, that is the same building. Like they're not updating it as they do it.
Yeah. If there were no nails 1,500 years ago, there are no nails now.
Yeah. So Kate says she just found out she unknowingly ripped off Shinto in her world building. Yeah. So
awesome. They don't mind.
You had people who were very concerned about being respectful in their presentation. There you go. So, okay. Yeah. So, what did I not ask you about that you were really hoping I would?
Let me think. I think we covered. Oh, the only thing I can think of that's a major topic that we didn't cover yet is shuriken. We
Oh,
have not.
I even had a terrible, terrible shuriken joke on my loading screen while we were waiting. Can a ninja throw a star? Sure he can. Oh, it's so bad. I cringe to say it out loud. It's so
Shuriken.
bad. Um, but I wanted something while we were getting organized that was it was up there. So yeah. So let's yeah, if we're going to talk about iconic pieces of the ninja mythos, let's go with shuriken.
Yeah, so the shuriken, the throwing star, it's the archetypal ninja weapon. And everybody assumes that the ninja are just all experts in throwing stars. And in fact, in English, we very often will call them like ninja stars or throwing stars rather than shuriken. But actually the name is shuriken or shaken, depending on shaken was also used. And they were not all stars, which surprises a lot of people. And they were not primarily used for throwing. So basically, the throwing stars weren't in any sense of the word. I mean, they were, but they weren't. Again, we're back to that same idea, right? It is and is not true. So the star shaped type was in fact real, and they were in fact used for throwing. But the primary use of a shuriken is actually as a fist load weapon, which surprises people until they actually start to think about it. And now the star shape makes sense, because if you have something that's shaped like a star, and you put your hand around it like this, you have an incredibly solid grip on that thing, and you've got the points sticking out, right? And you can swing your arm in any direction and you've got a point, right? So it's a fist load, the points coming out, and you would use it as a punching weapon. You could use it as a slicing weapon. It could be used not even just as a weapon, but as, again, as a lockpick, as a cutting tool, as it's like the ultimate in awesome multi-purpose weapons. And so, yes, it could be thrown. It was very effective when thrown, especially the star-shaped ones, because again, no matter what, it's really hard, although not impossible, I can attest from personal experience, to throw a star and have a point not hit, have it like hit flat and fall off the wall. I mean, that can happen. It's embarrassing as all get out. But you typically, when you throw
I
a
was just gonna
star, if you
say
throw it
throwing
at all
knives is really
correctly,
hard. Like that's another thing that is frequently wrong in the historic and fantasy universes. Throwing knives is really hard, and they don't all throw well. So having one with lots of points to make my chances better is a good thing. So yeah.
it is. And ninjas did use throwing knives as well. But the shuriken came, as I said, in a variety of forms. There was the bow, what's called the bow shuriken, which the bow shuriken basically looked like this, effectively. It was a long single rod with a point on one end or a point on both ends. It again would double as a gosen kugi or a climbing nail for walls. It could double as a lockpick. It could double as, and that this was the key. I mean, I think it's a theme we're coming back to, right? But the idea is more bang for the buck. So the more roles that your weapon can fulfill, the better weapon it is. But the bow shuriken was basically a sharp spike. There were the hira shuriken, which are the ones that we think of when we think of as the throwing stars, or the shaken, which were either star shaped, sometimes they were crosses, sometimes they were triangular in shape, and actually some of them were swastikas, which raises an issue that we see very commonly with people when they come into the Japanese culture. And it was a debate when the Olympics were first assigned to Japan, which was that the swastika is actually a far older Buddhist symbol than most people realize. It is centuries and centuries and centuries old, and it is actually a symbol that represents peace. It's a symbol that represents Buddhist temples, which is really ironic that it was chosen by the Nazis as their symbol, because they actually reversed it. But it was
They actually took a
ironic
lot
that
of
they chose
things
it.
that were good and turned them into bad things. So yeah.
They were pretty much experts at that.
Yeah.
But the debate that went on in Japan was, do we remove, I mean, if you go to Kamakura, if you go to temple towns, like there are swastika on signs all over. They're on every map. That
Right.
on Japanese maps, a swastika indicates the location of a Buddhist temple. That's not new. It's been that way for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so the debate was, well, we know that people are sensitive about this. Should we change our symbol? And the Japanese government said, you know what? Tourists can learn. They can learn that this symbol is older than the negative use that has become associated with it. And rather than making an entire culture change its symbology that it's had for centuries, it's better for people to learn.
Yeah.
And so that was the decision that was made. But it's interesting because when I've taken photos of shuriken at the Ninja Museum, the displays actually include, and you will may notice, like that was remarkably absent from the photos that I sent you. And part of the reason for that is that all of the displays show a variety of shuriken, and they include swastika shuriken because that's the originals that they had. And not only, most of them are stars, but it's really hard to post online a photo of, you know, 4 stars and 2 bow shuriken and a swastika, and then be
You
like,
want to make
let's
sure
have a
people are getting the
conversation.
whole context. They're not just scrolling past something. They need the lesson that goes with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's very, very difficult to share in an online context, because while I do think that it's important to understand that the symbol is not being used negatively when it's used in connection with Buddhist temples, I also realize that online conversations, including this, but especially social media, are soundbite level conversations. And you know, oh wow, you changed my understanding of the world, said no one ever after viewing an Instagram post, you know. So I'm very sensitive to that also. And I'm sensitive, in fact, the photos, you'll see the photos, I share a lot of photos online, and you will notice that the swastika are absent from them because I deliberately do not shoot for social media what would require an explanation, or also, you know, I have many friends who are Jewish who were impacted by World War II in really, really horrible personal ways. And I am respectful of that. And so I see no reason to be inflammatory when I have the option not to be.
Right. So we have a question in the chat. Sorry, thanks for waiting patiently, DM Stretch. He asks, were the claws in the palm of the hand a thing, or is that just Naruto?
That is a variant on the claws we looked at earlier, the metal claws that you saw. And yes, those could be worn either on the back of the hand or on the front of the hand. So yes, the claws, they would be worn on the back of the hand if you were going to use them as a weapon. They would be worn on the front of the hand if you're going to use them to climb something. So yeah.
Okay. And
Again, real, not real.
yeah, yeah. Well, and also going back to extremely flexible application, like have
Yes.
have stuff that works out in multiple ways, and you know, just a lot of a lot of weapons that we think of as, you know, traditional weapons, you know, like oh gosh, I'm totally mind blanking. It's a flail that has turned into a martial arts weapon, and I know the word, and it's gone. The threshing flail.
Oh, the nunchucks? Not the
Thank you.
nunchucks.
Yes, I'm sitting here. I'm like, there's a word. It's floating somewhere right there. Yeah. But yeah, just so many things that you could fashion from what was handy, and then suddenly it became that again. You know, so that when the Lord came by and demanded the taxes, you could be like, I wasn't killing your people. No. So,
Yeah, actually, a couple of really cool examples of that in terms of ninja weapons. Ninjas often would carry a grapple, right? A grappling hook so that they could climb. But if you're impersonating a farmer, farmers don't have any reason to have a grapple. But farmers do need sickles, small handheld sickles that they would use for cutting grain. 4 sickles bound together with a length of rope becomes a grappling hook. And
that is a
so
great
ninjas
example.
ninjas would actually do that. There are documentation of them carrying multiple sickles that would then quickly be assembled into a grappling hook. There's also an example of blowguns, which you would use for assassination or to administer a soporific, to, you know, put your target to sleep if you don't actually want to kill them. You just want to get in and out. In fact, there are lots of times when you would want to get in and out and get documents without actually killing someone, so nobody knew you were there. And ninjas learned that, you know, you can't really always carry a blowgun. That's a little bit, and sometimes they have to be long, and so that's kind of a dead giveaway. But you can carry a flute, a priest's flute. And so they became experts at sealing the inside of the flute with paper, which would cover the holes. but on the outside it would look like the holes. I mean, the holes would still be there. And so then it was a blowgun, but it looked exactly like a flute because it was just papered on the inside.
Those are great
And then
examples.
one more, which is that they would carry staves. Walking staves were very, very common. There still are in Japan, actually, and because it's very mountainous, and so having a walking stick was helpful. And the ninja were very good. A lot of walking sticks were made of bamboo, or made of, the thicker ones could be made of actually solid pieces of wood. Ninjas would hollow them out, and in some cases they would use bamboo tubes that were just large enough that the entire ninja's sword could slip down inside of the walking stick, and then you could seal the walking stick up, and you could even seal it up permanently. And that was one of the ways where ninjas in the later years could get through the barrier station, because they would come through dressed as a monk with a walking stick, and if you were careful to pad the inside, so you stick your sword in it and then you pat it down, right, so that if they shake your stick it
You don't
doesn't go
want it
rattle,
shaking.
rattle,
Like
rattle,
that's kind of
rattle.
a giveaway. Yeah.
Right. But you could get a sword, or you could get plans, or you could get maps, or you get all sorts of things through a barrier station inside a staff.
Great. Yeah. Um, those are fun. I had not heard the thing about the sickle, and that's so obvious now that you say that. But also, probably would have gotten by me. I would have been like, "Hey, it's a guy with a sickle. Like, let him go." Right? Like, yeah. So
Why is he carrying 4? We're not sure. Let him go.
he's got a lot to cut. Like, and he's got friends he's meeting up with. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Um, yeah. So did we cover shuriken, or did we have? Because I got excited and detoured in the middle of that.
No, we did. We covered him.
Okay.
We're
Good.
good. We're through. Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes I've been known to get excited and not let people finish what they were enthusing about while I was busy enthusing over here. So
Me
um,
too. You are my people.
yes. So yeah, I cannot wait until I can get back to your side of the world and we can go around and nerd together again. Because
Oh, that will be wonderful.
yes, okay, all the digits crossed. There we go. All right. Well, hey, we've been doing this for like, and I don't even know how long, like 90 minutes or something. So I'm having a great time, but I think you probably have like a whole day to get to over there. So,
Yeah, we're just
so
getting started over here today.
yeah, yeah. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us, and I learned things. It was great, and hopefully I'm going to get like a heist movie out of somebody stealing this 45-pound seal. Like I'm hoping I see that next
That
week.
would be great.
That would be great. So hey, oh, I've got your website up on the screen. If anybody wants to check things out, Susan does
Yes.
have
SusanSpann.com.
yeah, she has a ridiculous number of photos, and you even have history and culture articles that go up. Is it weekly? It feels like weekly. How often do those come out?
I have been lax about it for the last about a year, because we've all been sort of down a hole, but I'm getting back into it. My website was redone last year and we lost a number of photos, so I'm in the process of getting photos back up with some of the articles, because some of the photos have fallen away when we did a server change, but I'm replacing those. But yes, history and culture articles, mountaineering articles, photographs, they go up at least weekly, sometimes more often. I'm going to be getting back into like a 2 or 3 day a week mode. And also I do photos from Japan on social media, Instagram and Facebook, on a daily to approximately daily basis. So all different kinds of things, food, culture, history, you name it.
So many
I'm your
pretty
geek.
nature pictures. Susan climbs mountains because, of course, she does, and so you'll see a lot of beautiful hiking pictures. So highly do recommend. And DM Stretch says thank you. Hey, thank you very much for coming and asking questions. I appreciate it. Kate also thanks you. And
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you all
I
for watching. Thank you for coming and hanging out.
thank you for being patient at the beginning when I couldn't get Susan's voice to come through the thing. So I'm so glad we got that worked out. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it here. And yeah, definitely go check out Susan's site and her photos and things. And Susan, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me on. It was great to talk with you. Great to see you.
Yeah. Okay. Good night, everybody. Well, it might be good morning to some people. It's a good day to Susan, that thing. Oh, Kate just found your Kumano Kodo and Nakasendo photos. So Kate's going to be busy for a while, I suspect. So, yeah.
Indeed.
All right. All right. Thank you, guys.